Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, April 12th, 2018. Ready for another show today. Plenty to cover, both on the national front and I guess my smaller bore, no pun intended, national front of gun fail. There's all sorts of news this morning, including, let's say, top of the salacious rumor news, a sixth Trump child floating around somewhere. I don't know whether we want to give any credence to this or not. Who cares? I don't know. It's salacious. Let's share it. That's actually a rumor in circulation as more details, I guess, emerging from the Michael Cohen raid. I guess they were also after some of the paperwork that he might have had in his office surrounding various deals he has, let's say, hammered together over the years to try and help Donald Trump, allegedly, hide his affairs and maybe even some additional children. There's some rumors floating around out there that at one point a deal was worked out once again with the allegedly with the National Enquirer crew. And remember, they were the ones who helped him develop the capture and kill plan with Playboy playmate Karen McDougal. The idea was, of course, that once rumors emerged that you had an affair or something with Donald Trump and had a story to tell, the National Enquirer, which is rumored to pay money for such stories, would approach you and say, we will pay money. We'll buy your story from you. We'll just have you sign this exclusivity deal. Tell us what you know. And then they would opt not to print the story, but they would enforce the exclusivity deal and thereby silence critics of Donald Trump or people who had salacious stories to tell about him. And apparently another such agreement was hammered out at one point with it sounds like the doorman at one of the Trump buildings who allegedly knew something or had heard some rumors about, or I don't know what else, may have videotaped the bar mitzvah of, I don't know, a sixth Trump child, at least the sixth anyway, and knew all about it and got a $30,000 payment, maybe, sort of, kind of, from the National Enquirer, which never printed the story. And hey, who knows? And allegedly with a woman who was a tenant in the Trump World Tower over by the UN building. Kellyanne Conway has a place there. It's not rumored that she's the mother of this child. I'm just saying. I think a better guess would probably be a Russian or Eastern European woman who could perhaps shelter the child out of the country. I don't know. I'm just guessing. It's conjecture. It would be irresponsible not to speculate at this point. But, of course, not top of the charts in terms of actual serious importance to the country. That continues to be, of course, having a psychopath president who may or may not be threatening war in the Middle East and may or may not trigger a constitutional crisis at any moment, and not just with Robert Mueller, but perhaps with anybody. He could be firing people. He's, of course, triggered we keep saying he's on the verge of or about to trigger a constitutional crisis. He has already done that in the emoluments field. We just don't care because something, money, I don't know, not salacious enough, a detail. And I don't know. Well, plenty to round up today. And as a matter of fact, I see Greg Dworkin has been very busy in rounding up stories and has sent me something in the neighborhood of 30 plus messages on Skype in the background. Not unusual activity for a morning, but just lets you know how many directions there are to go and how many sources we have for all of that. I mentioned that there was a gun fail element to today's roundup. And it's true. Nothing has happened in terms of people getting shot. That's good news. Gun fails do get rather messy from time to time, but this is a more interesting story, and it's nuanced. So just hang on just a second, and we'll get to it. I'll read you the headline here. This from one of the local Florida news outlets, an ABC affiliate, Local 10. Don't know exactly where that's based, but Parkland teacher, that is to say Parkland, Florida, where Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School is, and in fact, a teacher at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, faces charge after his gun is fired in a public bathroom. Apparently, one of the teachers who had publicly spoken out to volunteer to be one of the teachers, should Florida pass such a law, to arm teachers or to allow teachers to be armed, he volunteered to get the training necessary to carry a gun in school. And I guess he's been sort of self-training in the meantime. I don't know whether he already had a gun, but he has procured one at any rate and begun carrying it around, not in school, as far as I know. And that would still be against the rules and illegal, but I guess on weekends, just for training purposes. And it didn't go very well because, of course, he left the gun behind in a public bathroom in Deerfield Beach, Florida. And I guess on his way wherever he was going for a day at the beach, remembered, I knew I had something when I went into the bathroom, and now I don't have it when I came out. And it's not the thing I meant to leave behind in the bathroom. It's my gun. Heading back to the bathroom, he actually heard a gunshot, at which point I assume he panicked and ran in. He could have panicked and run the other way. I'll give him that. He panicked and went in there to see what was going on. Oh, my God, has my gun been found by a child and accidentally fired? And is that kid okay? Or what? Instead, he found a drunken, apparently inebriated homeless guy. And I don't know whether he said, "Hey, stay back, I'm homeless." The story was circulated like he's a drunk homeless guy. He might not be. He might be a drunk millionaire. I don't know. Or maybe he just has no fixed address. Or maybe he's the EPA administrator. I don't really know. But at any rate, he wasn't supposed to have that gun, and he did. And I will say, I told you it was going to be a nuanced story. I'll put this out there. Oh. And one of the pieces of nuance in the story, at least in the ABC 10 piece that I have, the teacher is quite clear in his support for the protesters, the protesting students at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. He does not disagree with them. He feels that a better solution, and I think a lot of us agree, to the issues would be removing the many overly powered guns in circulation, just to reduce the number of guns in circulation in general, not to arm teachers. But in the absence of such a solution, or in an abundance of caution in the world of, in the minds of people who believe that more guns equals more caution, I don't know how he resolves the two. But he has said, one, I'd rather get rid of the guns. Two, I guess I would take it upon myself. I'll do anything to protect my students, was sort of his. I can be sympathetic with the mindset. I don't know if I like the methodology. And I guess he also said, look, a lot more training is going to be necessary before this is allowable inside of a classroom. I guess just witness how I just screwed it up. But of course, it's making waves across the internet, and therefore well worth sharing. Greg Dworkin is here. I know that that was among the stories that caught your eye too. Good morning.
Yeah, because one of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas seniors, Lex Michael, tweeted about this. My environmental teacher just gave another example of why we shouldn't arm teachers. His name is Sean Simpson. Thanks, Simpson. Love you. I'm supposed to have him tomorrow, first period. If he's there, I got jokes to make.
Well, he's free on $250 cash bond. So
right, exactly. That. So maybe he gets to teach. I don't know what the bond. I don't know what happens there. Like, are you restricted from being around people when you're on bond? Who knows?
I'm not really sure. By the way, this is interesting. So the homeless
no, he's
guy.
back. Lex Michael says the legend is back, and everybody keeps making jokes. This kid walked in late and said, do you have a pass? And the kid goes, I don't know, but we all make mistakes.
I thought he was going to say he left his pass in the bathroom.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, yes. And good news, the authorities are cracking down and getting serious. The homeless man was charged with trespassing in the bathroom.
I suppose, yeah.
Why? I don't.
It's not his bathroom. He doesn't live there.
That's true. But if he just says, I was coming in here to use my gun.
Isn't this Florida? Aren't we talking about Florida here?
Yes. I don't know. I'm not sure why you can do that, but maybe he'll be free on bond soon too, because I'm sure he's got $250 cash. All right. Well, another issue for another day.
Yeah, well, that's a Florida thing. We're going to talk about some New York things in a minute.
Okay.
We're going to go into this taxi medallion thing I mentioned the other day because it's fascinating. But
Yeah,
I'm going to start with something completely different, and
All right.
I'm going to bring you back to psychology here and the rider and the elephant. Only, we thought about it a little different way. Think of this as the press secretary and the elephant.
Okay.
Okay? The elephant wants to go a certain way, and the
Yes.
press secretary can't control him. We
Okay.
used to call it the rider. That's the logical one, but the
Yes.
emotional elephant wants to go where they want to go. And one way to
Trespassing elephant.
kind of make the elephant go where you want to is to create a path for them.
Yes.
So
okay.
it's an interaction between the rider, the elephant, and the path. For listeners of the show who've heard this before, you kind of can get that mental image. The elephant is the emotion that'll just go where it wants. A path can be created to help guide it.
Permission
And another way to
structure.
guide it is to sit on the elephant and try to goad it to be in a certain direction. But if the elephant doesn't want to go there, it's not going to go there. On the other hand, the elephant can decide, you know what, I'm scared, or I'm angry, or I just got stung by a bee, or I saw a mouse,
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
going to go rampaging through the woods and make my own path.
Yes. That's
I'm
the
going to be a
elephant's
disruptor. I'm just
prerogative.
going to
Oh, yeah.
right?
It's
And the press
elephant
secretary.
startup.
And you're right. Press secretary is going to say, oh, look at the path he's going on. We have a plan.
Ah. Okay. Yeah.
Right? And the elephant's going, this, that, I don't know. And the press secretary said, no, he meant to do that. Look at that
Right.
beautiful path in the woods. Clearly, it's in a straight line. It was the plan all along.
Right.
And everybody looks at the press secretary and says, you're lying, Sarah.
Yes.
Right?
Lion Sarah.
Lion Sarah. So that's the basic image to keep in mind. So this story from Vox that I'm starting with is really interesting. 9 essential lessons from psychology to understand the Trump era. Motivated reasoning,
boy.
bias, fake news, conspiracy theories, and more explained. It's by Brian Resnick. It's really good. And I'm not going to go through all
in
9,
Vox.
but I'm going to just highlight a couple of things because it's important when you listen to the stories about what's going on with Michael Cohen and what's going on with Comey, and is Rosenstein going to be fired? And by the way, are we going to attack Syria? And put this in context in terms of how you receive these stories, how you understand the news.
Okay.
Right? We can go over the news and say it's this and this and this, but people don't react logically, and that's why this is so helpful. So number 1, motivated reasoning, rooting for a team changes your perception of the world. And the classic example, of course, is how do you think the economy is doing?
Yeah. Right. That's true.
Right?
Awesome.
Right? It depends
I think.
upon whether there's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House.
Yeah. Very much. Usually the case.
Right? So if a Republican's in the White House, then the economy's gotten better since Obama was there. If you're a Republican.
Yes.
Right?
I guess.
But,
I mean,
but
it's
if you're a
weird
Democrat,
because
no,
it's supposed to be
I'm worse.
numbers. Yeah. It's supposed to be numbers based. That's economics for you. But
But it's not.
Yeah,
So
it isn't.
so that's
That's
the
not the way people
motivated
work.
reasoning part, and that's where Hugh Hewitt can come on and say that I was against everything Trump stands for, except not anymore, or Larry Kudlow, or any of those other guys
right.
who basically are hired trolls. But motivated reasoning means, the old Upton Sinclair line. It's hard to convince a man of something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it.
Yes.
So Kudlow was absolutely against tariffs until he started to work for Trump, and now, he either has to say, well, he doesn't really mean the tariffs the way he means, or you don't understand what he's doing, or some other
Friendly
explanation
tariffs.
as to why Trump is for tariffs and always has been, but that's okay.
Yep. Okay. Sure.
That's the motivated reasoning part. And the second one here, which I think is the most fascinating, and that's the one that'll come into play, and I did a little graphic for you right at the very, very bottom of that long list, which I rewrote so it would make more sense. Evolution has likely left us with an ideological immune system that fights off uncomfortable thoughts, or, if you will, uncomfortable ideas.
Okay.
Okay? And that's the reason that we engage in motivated reasoning. Okay? We want to cooperate in groups, and if ideas come along that are anti-group, our minds tend to reject them.
Okay.
That's the immune theory idea. And here's a great example. This is from the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. Okay? And think of it in terms of an idea that you might find interesting an idea that you might find uninteresting.
All right.
All right? And let's say at 100%, the most interesting idea is going for a walk on a sunny, beautiful day.
Why not?
And the most uninteresting idea you could have is having your tooth pulled.
Oh,
having a root canal. One of those, something like that.
Okay, I mean, interesting. And it's interesting that
Yeah,
those would
you
be
like
classified as
to do this, or would
interesting.
you not like to do this?
Yeah, Okay.
I'd like to go for it. Would you rather go for a walk on a beautiful day here at San Clemente on the beach, or would you rather have a root canal? It's up to you.
Yes.
What do you want to do?
Plum
You can do either one.
Yeah, okay.
So if you ask,
I'll do
this
the
is
walk.
Obama versus Romney voters. And the idea is if you ask Obama voters,
Yes.
if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Obama voters' reasons for voting for Obama, there's like a 5-8% interest in that. So it's sort of interesting. Yeah, I'll give it a shot. I'll listen.
Okay.
But if you ask those same Obama voters, Armando's in my mind when I'm looking at this. If you were interested in learning about Romney voters' reasons for voting for Romney, the Obama voters are completely uninterested.
Yeah, all right.
Right? I'd like to learn a little bit more about my tribe. I'm really uninterested in the other tribe. How uninterested? It's like 38%. And then when you look at the Romney voters, it's the same thing in reverse, except more exaggerated. Romney voters compared to Obama voters are a little bit more interested in learning about Romney voters' reasons. Instead of 8%, maybe it's like 12%. And in terms of learning about Obama voters' reasons, well, the Obama voters were like 38% not interested in Romney voters. The Romney voters are like 45% not interested in what Obama voters think.
Huh. Well, I guess I can understand that, although it does make it difficult to understand the New York Times publishing strategy right now.
Which is?
Let's tell everybody
Let's
the reasons
talk
for
about
Trump
West
voting.
Virginia,
Yeah.
Big Mac buyers and why they're so interested.
Although I think it's a different
Yeah.
phenomenon slightly. I mean, I'm also not interested in Romney voters. However, I guess there's a morbid fascination with Trump voters.
I'm just saying you have to step back and just, at least somewhere, the press secretary, the writer, has to remind the elephant that we, too, are not that interested in the other side's story. And after hearing it twice, it's like, okay, enough. You don't have to keep doing this. But that is a natural, a phenomenon that just happens to everyone. And so this is part of that explanation. So when we talk about what's going on with Michael Cohen and with Comey and with Sean Hannity and how he talks about all of this stuff, one has to realize that the tribe that is, let's say, pro-Trump is going to take in this information very differently than the tribe that's anti-Trump. That you're more likely to go with the motivated reasoning and you're a little bit more interested in hearing these wacky theories. Whereas if you are already anti-Trump to begin with, you're going to reject them and say, I'm not interested in that. Who cares about what Sean Hannity says? And it's one of those, you can say that in a lot of different ways. We all have our different news bubbles and so on and so forth. But the crossover between those two groups is perhaps the most interesting. But the bulk of people who really are uninterested in what the other side has to say, is just part of a existing phenomenon that is not going to go away and cannot be changed. It's part of human nature.
Okay.
Right?
I don't care about that.
That's true. So the other points they make are a president can actually sway opinion. I'm for tariffs. No, I'm against tariffs. I love the NFL. No, I hate the NFL. Depending upon what Trump is trying to sell. But this is another interesting one. And that goes along the whole idea of this motivated reasoning thing. We're going to talk a lot about what's going on with Michael Cohen and how this is being presented in the news. But point number 4 here is that people can understand inconvenient facts. You can even accept those facts. But it's very hard to make them matter. And that's where you have the classic, I know Trump's a crook, and I know I don't trust him, and I know nobody trusts him, and I know he's just like BSing, but I'm for him.
Okay.
Well, what about these other facts? Yeah, I get that, but I'm for him. Why? Because I am.
Right.
Because the elephant wants to go through the woods, that's why. And, of course, we know for a lot of those folks why it is. and Armando's pointed this out a number of times, but there's a relatively new article from Alan Abramowitz looking back on the white non-college educated voters, basically saying it has nothing to do with economics and everything to do with race.
Yeah.
But whatever it is that's motivating the elephant is going where the elephant wants to go, and you can't convince the elephant to go somewhere else just by giving him some inconvenient facts. The elephant might accept the facts and still is going to run through the woods. Okay, here's another one. It's really hard to change political opponents' minds by arguing with them. That doesn't work. You have to persuade them.
Yes.
And the bottom line there is it helps to be empathetic when arguing with another person, at least if you want to win the argument. If you just want to have fun arguing, that's a different story.
Yes, lots of us like that.
Yeah. Now, white people's fear of being replaced is very powerful. It's a very powerful motivator.
Is it?
So the threat of a minority-majority America changes racial attitudes, and that's going to be driving a lot of Trump voters. It's also easy, shockingly easy, point number 7, to grow numb at the suffering of others, which is why if you just, after a while, I don't want to hear about DACA people anymore. I'm sick of them. They're always in the news. It's inconvenient for me. Let's move on. Let's talk about the NFL.
Sure.
And then finally, conspiracy theories may be rampant. Oh, and stop talking about Puerto Rico. You talk about it all the time. I'm so sick of it.
Right.
Why don't they just fix themselves, lift themselves up by the bootstraps?
Yeah, or the latest thing is all you kids, disadvantaged kids, stop celebrating getting into college.
Yeah. Who's that jerk who sells, empowerment lectures, Tony Robbins?
Oh, yes, right, sure.
Let's send him to Puerto Rico and let them empower themselves.
Yeah,
why do they keep bothering me about the stupid power grid?
I don't understand Tony Robbins. Yeah, he was just recently, of course, in a mess and still there, and who cares?
Yeah. Anyway, well, but
he did the wrong thing.
Right?
That's
send it to Puerto Rico and let him empower Puerto Rico, and everything's fixed. And I have to stop hearing about this. Point being there. Is that people do get tired about hearing about disaster. Point 8 is fake news preys on our biases and will be incredibly hard to stamp out. And point 9 is conspiracy theories may be rampant, but there is specific reaction to a dark, uncertain world. So if you have this racial resentment and then that's juiced up by the news that you watch, and you're more likely to be interested in it because you happen to fall in that world, then you have what you have, and that's why the numbers are the numbers, and that's why Trump's always at 40%.
Okay.
So put that in context to when you start hearing things. The first piece, harder news here we're going to talk about is this raid. We talked on yesterday, I think, about who Michael Cohen is and why he's so important to the Trumpers.
Yes.
Right. But this is, why was the raid so important? And there's a lot of confusion about that in the news. And I'm just finding all sorts of interesting angles on that. For example.
Kills bugs dead. I know that.
Yeah. WikiLeaks started publishing Clinton campaign emails an hour after the Access Hollywood tape news broke.
Yes.
Remember that?
Right.
Okay. Why did WikiLeaks start publishing Clinton campaign emails an hour after the Access Hollywood tape news broke? Was that because Julian Assange was a tool, a cutout of the Russians? And was there any kind of contact between the Trump campaign and Julian Assange through Roger Stone or anybody else?
Yeah, okay.
Was it a coincidence?
Yes.
Or was it collusion?
No collusion. No collusion. It's a good question. I mean, it could
it is
just
a good
be
question.
That's
so my
when
point
the guy
is,
woke up. But right.
When you read in the paper that the raid on Trump's lawyer sought records on Access Hollywood tape, what are they looking for?
Oh, like help! The Access Hollywood tape story is breaking. Leak something. That sort of thing would be what you would want?
Did Michael Cohen direct Roger Stone to contact Julian Assange and say, do it now?
I see. Did he?
I don't know. But they got all the records. That's the kind of thing that, in other words, so why are we going over this Access Hollywood tape? We already know that Trump said nasty things about somebody's pussy. Is that what they're doing? And is that why they're raiding? We already know that. What's new about that?
Okay.
The answer is, are you coordinating the response to it?
That's definitely one question. I thought perhaps maybe they might also be saying, well, I understand that there was some idea that he may have tried to negotiate a quiet death for those tapes too, and it's just a part of the pattern. Yes, and we're going to
get to that, and that's yet another angle. But what I'm trying to say is it isn't the salacious just reviewing of things we already know. The question is all of this being done in the context of A, coordinating with outside powers to influence the election,
Maybe.
or 2, to suppress information to influence the election?
Also maybe.
And people will say, well, but this is beyond Mueller's charge. Mueller's supposed to be looking at whether or not people are influencing the election. And you go, did you hear what I just said?
Yeah, he could very well be. And in the alternative, there's also another problem, and that's, I guess, for the U.S. attorney to sort out.
Right.
Okay.
And then, there's other aspects of it as well. So let's say that there were questions about, as the New York Times story says, the warrant sought evidence of whether the lawyer Michael D. Cohen tried to suppress damaging information on the president before the election. Did he pay for that? If he paid for that, is that part of using money to influence your payee? Where did you get the money? Did you tell the bank what the money was for? Mm-hmm. And if you applied for money through the bank and you lied about it to the bank, that's bank fraud.
Yes. Leave the banks out of it.
And so that's a crime. And if Mueller uncovers a crime in the process of looking for other stuff, he refers it down to the Southern District of New York and said, look, you financial guys here, You're used to this. This is a white-collar crime. Go ahead and check that out.
Right. And keep
more after the break, but, there's a lot of reasons why Michael Cohen's office was raided, and it goes beyond I'm trying to intimidate Trump's lawyer.
Yeah, that's true. There are a lot of connections to it. And look, if they find out, hey, it really isn't connected to Russia, well, that's fine. It's just a different crime. Someone else will take care of it. That makes sense. That can't happen. We can't have things making sense. We'll come back and scramble them up again after the break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Plenty to cover this morning, and I don't know, we'll just do it in random order, or maybe the order you texted them to me. Well, it's up to you. Your call. Let's see. When we left off, though, we had almost made sense of the Access Hollywood portion of the raid, which I guess the Access Hollywood part only came to light hours after the announcement of the raid. No one knew initially that was part of what was seized. I guess we didn't know at all what was seized in the first few hours, but
right.
It seems like it was another wide range.
There's a media analyst, John Ziegler, who I'm not particularly fond of, but had an intriguing set of observations to make about the Access Hollywood thing.
Yes.
But let me just finish with this New York Times story, again, to frame what you just said. The warrant also covered emails and other documents that could reveal Mr. Cohen's private communications with Mr. Trump during a tense period in the presidential campaign when Mr. Trump confronted the possibility of embarrassing details of his extramarital affairs. And it delved deeply into Mr. Cohen's past, including documents about Mr. Cohen's personal and business finances, including his work as a New York taxi fleet manager.
His work as a what?
Because he owned a bunch of taxi companies. Which, by the way, was a very lucrative practice. We're going to get into that in a moment. But also a good way to launder money.
Oh, I guess so. Yeah, a lot of cash floating around.
Yeah, in any case, the Ziegler theory about the Access Hollywood tape, which, and he makes a couple of good points, is that if you go back and remember when the Access Hollywood tape came out, it came out two ways. And the first way is that somebody emailed David Fahrenholt at the Washington Post the tape.
Oh, him again.
And then you remember that? And then they put together the story, and it was in the Washington Post. And then hours later, MSNBC said, we can confirm it, and then they did their own story on it.
Ah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know
Right?
if I remember the initial emergence of the story.
Well, I didn't either, but I just read that.
Oh, all right. You said it like, of course you remember.
Well, that's because I'm an amateur on the radio pretending to be a professional. And
Yes.
so,
Good
let's
job.
pretend we have, infinite knowledge and know all these things.
Cool.
How else are we going to persuade our listeners that we're right?
I don't know. They're elephants.
You have to sound authoritative, You have to sound like you know what you're talking about.
Right. Okay. I can.
But
get
we're
along with
bloggers,
that.
so we do it with links when Scott Anderson, rounds up the show later. That's just how it's done.
Yes.
So Access Hollywood comes out, and it comes out in that way. And a lot of us at the time, you will remember, scratching the head and said, why didn't NBC know about this? It's an NBC show.
Yes.
Well,
is it?
rumors are, and rumors still
Access
continue to
Hollywood?
be, that NBC did know about it, and they knew about it for a long time. And why didn't they release it when Trump announced that he was going to run for president, when he came down the escalator at Trump Tower? Why did it have to be middle of the campaign after Trump had already won the nomination?
Mm-hmm.
And so, did NBC suppress it? Going out of their way not to make news? What's going on there? And that question actually has never really been looked at, never been properly answered.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, my initial thought was that they just were like, I don't know, it happened a long time ago. No one remembered. I thought no one would remember. I guess Billy Bush would remember it, and a few other people, producers or editors, sound guys, probably.
Yeah, exactly. May I respectfully point out something?
You sure you can do it respectfully?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
NBC is a freaking news organization. Why didn't they check it out? You're hearing all these rumors from people who work with you and for you.
Yeah. Well, now, one of the rumors that was floating around was that there was a lot of similar tape from The Apprentice, also an NBC show. Was Access Hollywood on NBC?
No, I don't know. I think it was a franchised, thing, so it could have been in a lot of different places.
So you mean, why wasn't NBC checking the tapes of The Apprentice?
Everything. Why aren't they signing a reporter like Ronan Farrow to go and just delve into this sort of thing?
Like everyone knows he's a short-fingered vulgarian. There's surely tape of him somewhere, and we're a major network.
Actually, we're a media company, and we have access to some of these things. Why don't we actually assign a reporter to go check this out and do this now?
Now, the Apprentice stuff was protected by the producer. What was his name again? Mark
Berman.
Yeah. But certainly, and the story did eventually emerge later.
Eventually.
That there was rumored to be such tape and that it was being protected by the production company. But, yeah, I don't know why NBC News. I don't know. That's a good question.
We don't know. I mean, that's just one that nobody really spends a lot of time on, and I don't have the answer for it. But I'm just saying, there may have been people who wanted Trump to run because it was good for ratings. Who knows? I don't know.
Could be. Yeah. Or at that time, when Trump said he was going to sue you, it was frightening.
Except for anybody who actually knew what was going on. But again, these are news organizations.
Right,
You don't
so
threaten the New York Times and have them back off his story. Right? You can do
Trump
that
does.
with your local paper, maybe.
It doesn't work.
But there aren't any local papers anymore, so I don't even know if you can do that.
Trump probably does that a lot.
But that's the context for all of that. In other words, there's a lot about the Access Hollywood tape that is more than just what Trump said in the transcript that's on the air that we all knew about that cost Billy Bush's job. There's also, how is that coordinated with the rest of the campaign? Why did it come out just then? So on and so forth. A lot of stuff to look at. And so there are intriguing questions about that. And by the way, was there an effort to suppress information? Was Michael Cohen part of that? And were there other things that were supposed to be suppressed as well? So the National Enquirer has a big piece this morning by Ronan Farrow, 3:19 a.m. The National Enquirer, a Trump rumor, and another secret payment to buy silence. You started to talk about that at the beginning of the show with rumors about Trump fathering a child in the 80s who we don't even know about, and then trying to suppress that. And a doorman who worked at Trump Tower kind of knew about it, and then people were talking about maybe he would talk. So David Pecker, who works over at the National Enquirer, bought the story from him the way they did with Karen McDougal, and having bought this story, then suppressed the story. And when Ronan Farrow tried to interview that doorman and say, is any of this true? Because a lot of stuff in Farrow's reporting, in Farrow's own reporting, that says it's not really clear whether all of this is true. There's a lot of inconsistencies. And when he tried to go interview the doorman basically said, my time is valuable. How much are you going to make me an offer to tell you this story? And Pharaoh said, well, the New Yorker doesn't pay people to do it. And so the guy clammed up and said, I'm not interested.
Okay. Motivated.
Okay. So question there is that a pattern? Does Michael Cohen have anything to do with it? Was it just a mere coincidence that the National Enquirer happened to offer a lot of money in a way that they don't normally do in order to assist Trump? Was it to assist Trump? Did it have anything to do with the campaign? Does it violate campaign finances? And what about the payments to Karen McDougal, Stormy Daniels, and everybody else? Was that also a matter of violating campaign finances? And where did the money come from? And if you borrowed it from the bank, because let's say, I don't know, you told somebody you were going to do a home improvement loan and then you used that money to pay Stormy Daniels and you lied to the bank about where you got the money. Is that bank fraud and is that white-collar crime, and do you need to investigate that? So that's all how all of that ties together. And so, again, there's a lot more to the Access Hollywood tape than just Access Hollywood. It's that time in the campaign, who was coordinating with who, and was it part of a broader project to suppress information that would be damaging to Trump? And that's why when James Comey is going to appear Sunday night with George Stephanopoulos, according to the blurbs, and is going to say he's like a crime boss, that's what they're talking about. Because when the FBI investigates organized crime and white-collar crime, this is how they do it. They go to the banks and they see where the money is and they see what the money was used for and whether or not it was done under lawful claim, and then follow that to wherever it goes.
Yeah. Well, that's the way those investigations work, because that's the way those organizations work. So
right. So, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is Michael Cohen, the lawyer here. Well, how could you rate a lawyer? Lawyers have lawyer client privilege.
Special rights.
This guy is not exactly a Boy Scout.
No, he's not.
And rating the lawyer. I mean, if you ever watch the Godfather movie, you know what's going on here. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. A lot of comparisons being made, although I found it difficult to make to sustain the comparison. But people pointing out, you're not really acting as an attorney if you're Tom Hagen here, for instance. But Hagen was a better lawyer.
He was a better lawyer. But if you are actually part of committing a crime,
yes,
then you don't have that kind of protection.
No, Hagen was in a movie. So.
Right. So anyway, let's look at this Chris Eliza piece. He happens to have very cleanly summed up this taxi medallion piece to give you a better idea of Michael Cohen and his history. Yeah,
I wanted to know about that.
Michael Cohen and the absolutely amazing history of the once coveted New York City taxi medallion. Okay? When FBI agents raided the home and office of President Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, on Monday, they were after documents related to the hush agreement Cohen cut with porn actress Stormy Daniels. I don't know what kind of a star she is. She's a star now.
Yeah.
11 days before the 2016 presidential election. But they were also in search of documents tied to Cohen's ownership of New York City taxi medallions. Cohen has held numerous medallions in his portfolio, according to records, which is totally fascinating and totally New York City.
Yes. I mean, a lot of people don't even know what they are.
Well, if you don't live in the Big Apple,
yes,
this story says, you almost certainly have no idea what a taxi medallion is, why they're valuable, and why Cohen owns several of them. Spoiler alert, the answers to B and C are related. Let's start from the beginning. Way back when, in 1937, New York City officials made the decision that in order to operate a taxi cab in the city, you needed to own or lease a taxi medallion. And they set a ceiling on the number of total medallions. The cap now is more than 13,000, but it was a limited thing. You didn't have a medallion, you couldn't participate.
Right. So it was like a license to operate, but there was a cap on the number that they could put out there. Okay. Right. No Uber was what they were saying.
Writes Kathy Challenge on Taxi Intelligence. Yes, of course, there is a site dedicated to taxi news. The medallion program, dating back to the 30s, arose thanks to an enormous number of taxi cabs flooding the streets, including inducing congestion, intense fare competition, reckless driving. Think gangs in New York and the competing fire departments.
Yes, or think Uber and Lyft.
Right. Well, Uber spoiled all of this because it spoiled the monopoly. But limiting the number of cabs on the street, of course, meant the market was supplying fewer taxis, and limiting the number made each one extremely valuable, particularly as the number of people in New York City grew, and the vast majority of them didn't drive. You can't drive in New York City. There's no place to put your car. The only way to get a medallion was to buy one from someone who had one or purchase a new one.
Yes, like
So the value of
season
medallions,
tickets.
driven by their scarcity, went through the roof. In 1937, the medallion sold for $10, which is about, multiplied by 10 now, $160 in today's dollars. But by June 2013, each one was estimated to be $1 million.
Wow, that is a lot of multiplication. $1 million to get a
Per
license
medallion.
to operate a single taxi cab.
And people collect them.
Wow.
Okay, so
I mean,
according
is
to
that-
New York Times Upshot, the value of the medallions quadrupled in the decade leading up to 2013.
Yes, all
and the
right.
cost was so exorbitant that many people leased a portion of a medallion, sharing it with several other people and driving 24 hours a day to recoup the investment. And if you've seen HBO's The Night Of, you know what I'm talking about. I never saw it, but I still know what they're talking about. Anyway, then Uber and Lyft happened. The ride transport services flooded the city streets with supply, making the demand for the cabs far less urgent.
Right.
So September
Except for
2017,
the cash
taxi
cab.
medallions, once a safe investment, now drag owners into debt.
The Bitcoin of Uber or something.
Right. It's not clear what specifically the FBI was interested in as it relates to Cohen, but last year Cohen reportedly owed more than $40,000 in back taxes related to the medallions. And the man charged with managing Cohen's medallions, Taxi King Gene Friedman, was arrested in 2017 for allegedly defrauding the state on taxi fees.
Taxi King.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, there's a whole other story on that from BuzzFeed, which goes into the fact that a lot of the people that Cohen worked with on this taxi medallion thing, where you invest money in these medallions, like everybody he knew was like, it sounds like he was a Russian from Brighton Beach who wound up getting charged for something or other. And everybody he knew was a crook.
Yeah,
I'll
well.
get to that in a minute, too.
Oh, okay.
But for a very New York president and Donald Trump, the fact that taxi medallions are playing a role in the raid of his personal attorney is remarkably poetic.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
think
like
so.
a New York thing.
It's a weird thing. I mean, what an odd situation. And it'd be the Taxi King. He has nothing to do with Sausage King of Chicago, Abe Froman. Totally different guy. But it's weird. I mean, it's essentially just a cash. Well, I mean, taxi cabs,
It's an
mostly
investment.
cash business.
People invest in them.
Yeah,
they,
and I
they buy
mean,
them, trade them. There's probably a whole market for it.
Yeah, and I bet that happened a lot in Trump Tower. That's just the sort of thing like, waiting for the elevator at Trump Tower. Somebody just would tip another of the idle rich and say, I'm making a killing in taxi medallions. Really? Oh, I'll get into that. Art investment. I'm an art dealer and a taxi medallion dealer.
A taxi medallion collector,
Yeah.
right? So I am going to, and of course it was an art dealer that burned to death in that fire in Trump
Right.
Tower, but that's another
No
story.
medallions, as far as I know.
The BuzzFeed piece I'm giving you here is by Anthony Cormier. Robert Mueller is asking about this little-known chapter of Michael Cohen's New York life, but just giving you an idea. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's like super complicated.
Okay.
Cohen followed his father-in-law into the rough-and-tumble world of New York taxis in March 1997, registering 5 new cab companies, including Sir Michael Hacking Corp. The name isn't Michael Hacking. A hack is a cab. So it's the Sir Michael Cab Company. Sir Michael Hacking Corp. And Lady Laura Hacking Corp., according to New York State business registration records. The holdings grew. Cohen, his wife, and his in-laws hold a stake in more than 15 colorfully named taxi companies such as Golden Child Cab Corp. And Smoochie Cab Corp. When Cohen testified before the House and Senate Intelligence Committee last year, one lawmaker asked him if he used the alias Michael Hacking because the lawmakers thought Hacking was the last name. It's not. It's a taxi driver.
Yes,
And then
but
Cohen
still.
entered into a series of taxi management agreements with a guy named Garber who controlled cab companies in New York City, Chicago, and Moscow.
Chicago. Oh, Moscow.
All of a sudden, your ears perked up and it got interesting.
Well,
In
Chicago
June
got it
20,
first.
2006, Yellow Cab SLSJET agreed to pay Cohen $69,000 monthly fee to use 30 of the medallions that every taxi cab must have, and in return, this company would get to keep any additional profits. New York authorities fined that company $1.6 million in 2014 for ripping off its drivers on fees to lease vehicles. I mean, there's just like a New York story here. Everybody's a crook. It's unclear if SLS Jet was managing Cohen's medallions during this time. I want to get into the construction industry. Yeah. You do, huh? Listen, Fat Mike will call you. You don't call Fat Mike. Fat Mike calls you. He'll discuss it.
Yeah. Wow.
Right?
What
Grew up in New York, you go, oh, I get it.
have you ever? I mean, it's funny. I'm looking at the picture here that you sent with the first story. I don't know if I've ever seen. Where do the taxi medallions go?
They go on the cab.
On the cab? I don't think I've ever seen one.
You have to have. I mean, you have to be able to display
Yeah,
it.
I know you're supposed to, but it never occurred to me to look for a medallion or to check. Like I'm getting
Well, it's
into a
hard
cab.
to because they go by you when you're trying to call them, so you can't really.
Even when I get in, I've never been like,
Well, you get in on the
show me
side,
your
but
medallion.
They don't slow down and stop so you can see the front of the car, and then you go inspect the
It's on
medallion,
front?
and then scan it with your phone, and then you get in. That's not how it works.
No, I know that, but it occurred to me now that I know we're
They're
talking
on the
about
part of
you
the
got to
cab that
have
you
them.
can't see, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
they go
I guess
by you
so.
and they go,
I
why
mean-
did you stop? Well, I didn't feel like it.
All I see are those things that they paste up with their photo, and their cab driver's license is on
Anyway, so
display.
this is in New York. So
Okay.
Then Cohen tried to end the management agreements. Gerber sued Cohen for breach of contract, alleging Cohen had manipulated Gerber's wife into executing new contracts that would raise the management fees. The case was dismissed. Half of Cohen's medallions are managed by a company run by this other guy named Friedman, who was charged in 2017 with stealing $5 million that should have been paid to New York State.
Sure.
And also, by the way, threatening to kill a former business partner's family. I mean, he runs with a good crowd.
Felix
His attorney,
Sater.
Patrick Egan, said Friedman denies the theft and plans to go to trial in June, and he wouldn't comment if Friedman had spoken to the special counsel. Cohen's father-in-law, Fema Schusterman, has been in the taxi business for decades and was charged in the early 90s with knowingly conspiring to defraud the IRS as part of a money laundering and tax fraud scheme.
What? Money
So
laundering.
I'm just trying to give you an idea of the background that this guy comes out of.
It is a family business.
It's
no
a
doubt.
family business, exactly right. The scheme was run with an accountant named Harold Wapnick, who prosecutors said prepared false tax returns for much of the city's taxi cab industry. At one point, Wapnick was estimated to have prepared taxes for 13% of New York City's taxi drivers. Wapnick was caught after he prepared false tax returns for an undercover investigator who was wearing a wire.
Oops.
Right?
Yes.
And then Schusterman's indictment alleged he structured payments to avoid the IRS scrutiny of transactions greater than $10,000. I mean, it's
Sure.
just on and on and on and on. I just want to give you the background here
I like
that
it.
the medallion collection business
Yes.
is more than just a hobby. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of false tax records. And if you want to invest money, it's like investing, in an apartment in Trump Tower with a shell company, and you don't really know where the money came from.
Nor what it's worth. And that's the reason it's good for money laundering. I guess at this point, honestly, if you just say, so what do you do for a living? I manage taxi medallions. Well, you're under arrest.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
What have I done? I just told me.
What do you do
just
for
committed
it?
a crime.
I'm in the construction industry in New
I
Jersey.
guess so. I'm a legitimate businessman.
I'm a businessman.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Wow.
Why? You got a problem with? No, I do not have a problem with that.
Well,
You
people
go right
have,
ahead and do that. I'm just going to leave the room and go somewhere else.
people would have a lot of questions. I mean, for a guy who, like Donald Trump, is, I'm in the business of fabulous luxury real estate. Everyone understands that to be the claim that he makes. But, also steaks, water, vodka, modeling agencies, pageants.
Oh, you mean you're in the New York City construction business?
Yeah. All
No,
right.
I'm in the luxury apartment business. What's the difference?
Yeah.
My
Yes.
lawyer will come and talk to you about the difference.
Right. I'm a lawyer / taxi medallion / art dealing /
It's important to have this background.
Mm-hmm.
We all knew this in New York
Yes.
City, and it's part of the reason why we kept knocking our head against the wall and saying, hey, I know about this whole psychological thing that you want to do something for your tribe, but
True.
don't you understand who you are electing?
That
Yeah,
is
but I like
true.
it anyway because it looks like he's a winner.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. But I guess people really didn't know what was there beneath the surface, and you had to be from New York and know what that implies. I mean, and it's not true of everyone from New York City, obviously, but still, yeah, when you're dabbling in all those businesses, like if you're in you say you're in the import-export business, yeah, where do you live? Medellin, Colombia.
That's
Okay.
right. And where do you work out? At Cochabamba.
Right. Okay, I gotcha.
Okay, I got it.
Right. You're the Perrier water
Yeah,
distributor.
you're talking
for the area.
about flutes and instruments, and you're talking about I don't know, ponchos, right? You move ponchos back and forth.
Right. Oh,
Yeah. That's it. Ponchos. That's what I did.
Legitimate clothing.
I'm a legitimate businessman.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
all right.
You
Good
know,
point.
But this is the background that it could. So now when you hear that Robert Mueller came across stuff that he thought might be a little dicey, you're thinking, how could you not?
Right.
And then what are you going to do with it? Well, you're going to give it to the You're going to go to Robert Rosenstein is what you're going to do and say, do I do this?
Rod, yeah.
Or do you want it to be done somewhere else? And Rosenstein's going to say, that is a New York thing. Why don't we go for the SDNY federal prosecutor who's like really used to this stuff and let them do it? And Mueller goes, fine.
Yeah, true. And they're the experts, too. I mean, 90% of the country, if you say taxi medallion, people don't know even what it is. Of course, say it to a prosecutor in New York, and they say, I think I need... Somebody just said taxi medallion. I want to record that guy.
Right. So would you mind if I stayed on a little bit longer?
No. Do you have any taxi medallions?
Well, I'm just looking at the time. We're getting close to the 10 o'clock break.
Yeah,
and what I
don't
could
mind.
do is talk about Paul Ryan after the break and do a little bit of a special extended show here.
Yeah, I think that's fine. That makes it can save my energy for Friday, as far as I'm concerned. Okay.
Anyway, so we have that Michael Cohen amazing story and that. And then, as part of all of this, Jeff Zeleny over at CNN says, President Trump's allies have a new battle plan to try and undermine Comey's credibility. RNC is taking the lead on the campaign to discredit the former FBI director with a Lion Comey website and digital ads. We have exclusives, and they talked about that on CNN today, according to this tweet. But at the same time, Sean Hannity, and I think I posted a picture for you, was running pictures of the Mueller crime family.
Yes, okay.
Right, where somehow there was a picture of Whitey Bulger in there somehow. I don't know exactly how that happened.
I see that it's there.
But
he was the director of the FBI.
Yeah, everybody's connected to everybody else.
Right.
And maybe for all I know, he owned taxi medallions,
Everybody.
So, but he was in Boston, so I don't really know. In any case, they're attacking Mueller now, trying to do that. And here's an interesting piece by John Storr, kind of a centrist, in the Washington Monthly, why the GOP won't protect Trump if Mueller is fired.
Oh, really?
But the reason there are stories like this at all is because everybody thinks Mueller's going to get fired now.
That's...
Why? Because he's investigating taxi medallions.
But he's not.
Well, somebody is.
Yes.
And it's his fault. And Rosenstein said that he could do it, so Rosenstein has to go.
But he didn't. All right. But yes, and that'll be an initial issue, right? I mean, they'll say, well, we're firing him because look how far afield the investigation is going. But I'm not investigating those things. I've assigned them to other people. Yes, right. But you are, I don't know, reasons. So there you are. You were around when it was announced, just as you were once FBI director and Whitey Bulger was arrested. Therefore, you're in cahoots.
Right. So John Storr writes, I would like to expand on Jonathan Bernstein's piece from yesterday about what's really at stake after the FBI raided last night the offices of Michael Cohen, President Trump's personal attorney, and a guy who also collected taxi medallions. So I just threw that in there. So if the president fires special counsel Robert Mueller, what's at stake, Bernstein wrote, is no less than the rule of law.
Oh, shoot. All right.
You know what the proper response to that is? Says who?
Yeah, okay.
So the question isn't whether this or that person is the right one for the job, Bernstein writes. If Trump acts, the question will be, as it was in 1973, whether the president is above the law. That's precisely why the massacre blew up in Nixon's face. Republicans didn't care about Cox, that was Archibald Cox, or the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, who was purged because he refused to fire Cox. They didn't care that those people were fired. When push came to shove, it turned out that many of them and many of their supporters did care about the rule of law. I think there was a Quinnipiac poll out the other day saying 70% of the population think Mueller should continue. So as much as the tribalism is there are certain facts that might overcome that, where the writer or the press secretary actually gets to direct the elephant. And if, and maybe when, Trump goes ahead and fires Rosenstein and then tries to rein in or fire Mueller, it's going to have big implications. I understand that Charles Grassley is actually trying to put together a law, a bill, now in judiciary that would protect Mueller to some extent, which is kind of incredible.
Yeah, I thought that he didn't care.
Yeah, all of a sudden he starts to care because everybody was saying, well, why are you bothering me with this? This isn't going to happen. Well, you know what? Right. Looks like it's going to happen.
Okay.
So Storr says, I'm also unsure, but we do have some context. Recall how the Republicans scrambled for an appropriate response to Trump's firing last summer of Comey. That scramble came close to outright panic as reports leaked about how and why Trump fired him, including boasts from Trump to a couple of Russian diplomats that canning Comey was a relief.
Yes. Or to
I'm not even
Mr.
concentrating on it. I've already mentioned Russia like 5 times, 8 times, 10 times today. The Republican near panic ended when Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein picked Mueller as the FBI special counsel. At that point, the GOP didn't have to defend the president. When asked, they could point to the ongoing investigation, and that allowed them to get on with the party business. This episode suggests Republicans do care to some degree about appearing to be on the side of the rule of law. I've also pointed out to you, they do care to some degree about telling the truth. They lie, but they claim they tell the truth. If they didn't really care about it, they wouldn't even claim. So it tells us that also the Republicans have a decent read on public opinion. Comey's firing was simple to understand amid an amazingly complex series of amazingly complex events, and all the more damning for being simple. Most people, most of the time, don't know much about the law. I can attest to that. I am not a lawyer, and I don't play one on the radio. And don't care that they don't know much about the law, but they do know that they can trust law enforcement institutions like the FBI to mostly do the right thing, at least some of the time. Mm-hmm. Conservatives especially tend to be exceedingly deferential to law enforcement agencies. We talked about in that psychology article about how Trump can change people's mind on that. But still in the background is the decades-long deference to law enforcement. Even after all that Trump and his attack dogs in Congress have done to delegitimize the FBI and the Mueller investigation, 2/3 of Americans trust the agency over Trump. At the same time, most Americans, even the president's supporters, know after a year into Trump's presidency he's not only troubled the relationship with the truth, but appears wholly allergic to it. Mm. And we've seen that doesn't matter. But you put them together, and in the end, this might turn out to be a big deal.
Well, I hope so. And, I have no
When you
objection.
lose Ann Coulter, you know.
Is she lost over that point, though?
No, she's lost over some other point. The point is that even his staunch supporters aren't forever.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, well, hopefully the respect for the rule of law holds on and lasts just a little bit longer. It's got 1 minute to last right now. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show right here on Netroots Radio. Still have Greg Dworkin with us. This is great. So I should have taken a nap starting 20 minutes
You're supposed to have breakfast. That's
that's what I usually do. This is too interesting to walk away from, though. There's so much happening, and as you mentioned once before the break and then during the break again, we haven't even really gotten to spend much time on the Speaker of the House, the third-ranking constitutional officer in the country, behind the impossibly criminal Donald Trump and the clueless theocrat Mike Pence, comes Paul Ryan, who's now, of course, walking away from everything, retiring at the ripe old age of 48.
Dead man walking. Want to spend more time with his family.
Yeah, and
even though he only works 3 days a week.
Right, somebody just brilliantly pointed that out. What could you do? What job could you spend more time with your family than the one where you're there Tuesday to Thursday and then back home? Mm. It's not really like that, but okay.
Right. So let's start with this excellent John Harwood article.
How do you like it?
In CNBC. I thought it was pretty good.
Okay, CNBC. All right, I'm with you.
After busting the deficit, the GOP's gestures toward fiscal responsibility ring hollow. This is the background for Paul Ryan's achievements and legacy.
Busting the deficit by way of increasing, obviously, not right. Like getting
House
rid of.
Republicans now say they will vote on a constitutional amendment requiring lawmakers to balance the federal budget. And the White House is also preparing to ask Congress to rescind some of the spending increases that Trump signed weeks ago. Maybe you'll give us a little tutorial on rescissions and how that works.
They don't work. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you very much. So the business model of the modern Republican Party doesn't produce real-world budget discipline. GOP lawmakers turn to make believe. And the whole point here is the constituencies here that are behind the current GOP do not allow for fiscal responsibility.
Right. Okay, that's true. You can't do it.
Okay, backers of supply-side economics dominate Republican tax policy. Urged on by GOP donors on Wall Street and in executive suites, they press continually to cut taxes. Advocates of limited government welcome the resulting reduction of federal revenue. They want Washington to do less, and if you will, the usual expression is starve the beast, although, as I pointed out on the show the other day, the beast they're starving are Trump voters in red states. But proponents of straightening America's military posture want more, So they pursue larger and larger Pentagon budgets. Older working class whites who disdain Wall Street depend on government programs like, for example, Medicare, increasingly defining the GOP voting base, because the biggest group of people who vote for the Republicans these days are the silent generation.
Okay.
The one before the greatest
Silent.
generation.
Oh.
You know, the 70s and 80-year-old white guys. They love the GOP.
Okay.
And
Well,
they
then now
don't
they're
want their
after
Medicaid cut. They don't want Medicare cut. They need Medicaid because they're in nursing homes.
Yeah.
Or their friends are, or their family members are. And so, as a result, you have people who want to spend money on the budget, people who want to spend money on the Pentagon, people who want to spend money on entitlements, and then you have, at the same time, people who want to cut taxes. And that's exactly the bill that came out of here. And guess what? It's a deficit buster. So you cannot have the GOP put together a coalition of GOPers and vote on a balanced budget, because it can't happen. The only way you can get enough votes is to give something to the tax cutters and at the same time give something to the people who want more military and more Medicare.
Yes.
Boom. You have what we have now, $1 trillion deficit.
Yep.
The only way you can pull that under control and decrease the deficit, if that's your goal, is actually to have a Democratic president, because they're the only ones that ever do it. But this explains why.
Okay. That does appear to be the case. The why is important.
Right? So now you have House Speaker Paul Ryan, and he keeps claiming that he's going to do the opposite. Basically, he knows he can't, but he lies about it, which is always why I laugh and say, well, he's a man of integrity. Yeah, well, he continuously lies all the time, and he is no policy wonk, and he's no genius, and he could never achieve what he claimed to achieve. And the only reason that he pushes this is because he has another thing in mind. Okay. He wants to cut or privatize Medicare and Social Security. That is his goal, and he lies about that.
I guess so.
And he says he wants to do it in terms of fiscal responsibility. And if you don't believe me, just listen to any Freedom Caucus member who opens their mouth right now when they are asked about, what do you think about this budget bill that you voted on and passed as a GOP? Well, the problem with the bill is it didn't address entitlements. I got this other bill over here that intends to do exactly that. And that's how you bring fiscal responsibility to Washington. Well, welcome to Kansas. If you don't pay for stuff, you don't have it. And if you don't have it, the constituents get mad. And the only way you can see yourself in helping is to cut more. That's not going to work. And, you know, there you have it. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons why the Republicans are in trouble in 2018. It's a lot to do with Trump, but it's also a lot to do with the fact that their agenda doesn't work for people. And if it's not going to be that makes people vote for the GOP, because that agenda, the Ryan agenda, is not one that the white non-college voter really was into. If they're into the racism part of it, then you got to be avowedly racist in order to keep those votes. And that's why you have Trump being such a, how shall I say this politely, hard negotiator on the wall and other things having to do with immigration.
All right, well, that's not true, but okay. Yeah, he says things a lot. That's true.
Right. So here's a piece. So then Ryan sees that there's no winning here, and that people are retiring. I think it's up to nearly 40 GOPers who are retiring and not going to, and they all want to spend more time with their family all of a sudden. And so it looks like the House is not going to stay Republican, and he then becomes the minority leader. And he says, you know what, I don't really want any part of that.
Yeah, and I guess it's not a done deal either. I mean, in normal times, that's what would happen, but it's not necessarily the case, A, that they stick around, or B, that the conference is going to reward them with the top spot again if they lose the majority. He was never the most popular speaker they've produced by a long shot.
Well, but here's the thing. A big portion of the GOP House is Freedom Caucus.
Right.
Maybe 40%. I don't know what the numbers are because they never tell you exactly who's in it. They just claim.
Yes, that's true. They never do tell you.
But if the GOP loses seats, it's more likely to be the Charlie Dent so-called center-right moderates,
Yes.
right, than it is the Freedom Caucus people who lose their seats.
Yes, Freedom
Therefore,
Caucus.
it's logical to think that a shrunken GOP House will have a bigger proportion of Freedom Caucus people in the new Congress.
Right. I'll agree.
And that makes it a lot more difficult to manage them.
Yes.
Their power goes up. Yours
They
goes
also
down.
can't manage themselves, but yes.
They can't.
No one
so
can
Paul
manage
Ryan
them.
is looking at this and saying, as hard as it was, it's even harder now.
Yes.
In the minority. I don't have any power in the minority, and everybody in the GOP conference is going to hate me, and if not everybody, then a higher proportion are going to hate me than hated me before.
Yes.
So why should I stay?
There is no reason.
Oh, by the way, on top of all of that, Donald Trump. I not only have to manage this, which was my major job, I also have to manage Donald Trump, which I never signed up for, and he's impossible. You want me to do that and this? You're nuts. I'm out of here.
It's good
And
thinking.
that's why Paul Ryan retired.
Yeah, I don't know. He doesn't seem to be able to anticipate the consequences of any of his policies, but he's
not
got a
very
pretty
good at what he
read
does,
this.
But that's besides the point.
Yes.
I'm
He's
just
got a
talking
good
about from
read
the point of
on,
view of what he's
I'm
looking at.
uncomfortable and this sucks. That he's clear about.
Yeah, very clear.
Okay.
So he's leaving. So what does he do? He says, I'm leaving, but I'm not leaving. I'm going to run out the tape. What tape? The Hollywood Access tape? I don't know what tape he's talking about.
I don't know.
Is he talking about a race where like you get to hit the tape at the end because you don't quit? So he's saying, I'm not going to run for re-election in 2018. I don't know if that means that Iron Stash runs against the Nazi. I'm not clear on that. But in his district, Wisconsin won, because I don't know what happens if he doesn't run. Okay. Is anybody running against Paul Nealon to get that slot?
Oh, not yet, although maybe that'll change. Has the date for the filing deadline come and gone there? I don't know.
I don't know. But that raises that
Daily
question.
Kos elections guys.
And I'm not even sure Iron Stash is the absolute nominee. I think there's a primary there too,
others,
but
yes.
I'm not sure. I haven't been following it that closely. So at the same time, he says, okay, so I'm just not going to run for re-election.
Right.
And Steve Scalise and Kevin McCarthy look at each other and say, really?
Okay. Yes.
If we lose, why? And everybody knows we're going to lose. And everybody knows you're not there, Paul Ryan. Why should anybody listen to you now?
Right.
You're useless to us.
If you're going to withdraw by a date certain, as they used to say.
You have always talked about the fact that one of the major influences into who becomes speaker is how much money they raise.
Yes.
Donor dollars just dried up. Why should you invest any money in a lame duck who is going to be minority leader?
Right. Oh, no, they're not
so
gonna
Paul Ryan's donor raising ability just went into the toilet.
Right. But if he's sitting on a war chest and someone would like to have access to some or all of that war chest, it would pay to work closely with him and look to run as his successor, even though that puts them in jeopardy with the Freedom Caucus part of the conference. So a ticklish situation here.
Very ticklish, and that's just for the people considering running. But what about the rank and file? Why should they take a tough vote?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's not happening.
Right. So if that's not happening
direction.
and he can't get people to take a tough vote, what good is he? And why don't you replace him now rather than later? That's the thinking that goes on in the caucus.
Okay.
From rank and file.
Ted Yoho.
Yeah. Freedom Caucus, Mark Meadows, Jim,
Sure.
Jim Jordan, those folks. So now you have Ryan saying, I'm going to stay till 2018, and a lot of people in the caucus saying, no, you're not.
Yeah, I mean, maybe
why don't
not.
we just do this now and get it over with? We know it's going to be painful, but if you don't leave, we can't get anything done. So let's just have this out now. And Kevin McCarthy is saying, well, I'm going to stay quiet about that, and we'll just see what happens. And Steve Scalise is saying, well, it's not a terrible idea. Well, let's see what happens. They turn to Trump and say, who do you support?
Huh. Right.
And Trump says, I love Kevin McCarthy.
Does he?
I love him so much. He's my minder. Whenever I have to talk immigration with Chuck Schumer, I always have Kevin McCarthy in the room with me because, I bond with this guy.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's
so. I'd like
he
McCarthy.
Sorts my
Lee
starburst.
says, but I'm a hero. I got shot.
True.
And Trump says, yeah, you're a good guy too, and you're pretty tough, so I like you too. That's what this story is about in the National Journal.
I prefer people
House
who don't
GOP
get
with
shot.
no good options. So Trump is trying not to, but can't help but get involved in the leadership succession. Mm-hmm. And he may wind up picking the winner because Trump is the only one who can argue the Freedom Caucus into supporting, let's say, a Kevin McCarthy, who's more of a centrist.
I guess so. Yeah. That's. Do you think Trump will go with McCarthy on that?
Trump is busy at the moment. He's
I don't.
worrying about taxi
Is he
medallions.
really? I heard he was just watching television.
So all of this is playing out in a vacuum, but they're jockeying for Daddy's, approval, and Daddy's kind of tied up in court right now, and so it's a bloodbath.
Daddy's approval
in the
is a
making
big
is
thing
what I'm
for
trying to
Trump.
say.
Yeah, good. Let's start now.
So, but you're the expert. I'm just reading. What do you think?
I would guess that it would be McCarthy in the end, just because. Even the people who say they want the job don't really want the job. They want the prestige, the title, the fundraising ability, etc. I don't know what Trump ends up doing. I don't know why he doesn't eventually say about Scalise, I'm a hero. I was shot. Well, I prefer people who weren't shot. Okay, so I'm going with McCarthy on this one. And I do understand.
But I
McCarthy
survived. Well, I prefer people who didn't survive. No, you don't, Mr. President. Don't say that.
I don't know what he prefers. McCarthy, I understand, sorts out Starburst for Trump and make sure he has only the colors that he likes in the bowl or in the package.
I thought that was Rich Flowers.
He was the original Starburst guy, but that was for Sarah Palin. So,
so this story says, with these realities dawning on them, some members are already predicting Ryan may not realize his dream. Representative Mark Amode, who forecasted in March that Ryan would step down, so the GOP conference may soon have to pull the plug on its evanescent leader. When Boehner said it's ready to leave, Amode said, recording the speed in which Boehner handed off his gavel to Ryan, at some point in time when you're on terminal leave, it wouldn't be unusual for somebody to say, okay, I get that, you're a great guy. How can we speed this up?
Yeah, that's, it's very unusual to linger as a lame duck in that position, and these are all the reasons why.
Here's more. There's more reasons.
Okay.
The reasons to avoid a lame duck leader are many. Ryan's presence will be a constant reminder of the Republicans' historic level of retirements this cycle, and I would add failure, because everybody knows they're going to lose, and that's all around Ryan's neck, and he's got the stench of a loser now, and thus the prospect that they will lose the House. Donors are loath to give to a leader with one foot out the door. And sources close to Ryan, this is interesting, said he gave those considerations little mind, to the dismay of some of his more politically observant colleagues. This is the downside of selecting a non-political speaker, who may have been a Republican's legislative savant, but clearly naive about the extent to which his decision will inconvenience the conference, right? Ability to push legislation is diminished. And in addition to that, you now have Scalise and McCarthy basically openly jockeying to replace him. That's how I know about him, and I'm hardly a Republican insider. And that means that every move they take in leadership is looked at rank and file as, are you doing this because you're trying for the job? And that just makes it impossible to actually get whatever job you're trying to do done, because nobody trusts you.
Right. And everyone will take positions, and then positions will be staked out based on what the other guy did.
Right, exactly.
So
and I don't know anything about Congress. You do, but I'll tell you, I know a lot about corporate world.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right.
It's the same thing.
Yes.
If you're working with administrators, this is exactly what happens.
Right. I can't have that guy have a victory. I don't oppose what he's doing. It's just that he came out first.
But I'm not letting him get the
credit.
It. The heck with that. I'm going to scotch it, and if it comes back, it'll be my idea.
Right.
Or it's not going to do, because I'd rather have it not be done than to see that guy get credit for it.
Yes. That happens a lot. Okay. Well, this should be an interesting couple of months, and I don't know why he insisted on going back and saying, the real problem is that Ryan was too much of a legislative savant. But okay.
Well, there's this myth and rumor and so on and so forth. And Jack Kemp's legacy and yada, yada, yada.
What?
But, the fact of the matter is, in a backhanded way, that article is making the argument that, Paul Ryan wasn't really all that good at politics, which, by the way, was pretty obvious because in this Matt Fuller piece, Paul Ryan's real legacy, Donald Trump. He could have stood up to Trump. He didn't, not really, at least. So Paul Ryan was the establishment person, the so-called non-political policy wonk who legitimized Trump by backing him. And people in the Republican side and the conservatives I talked to online all say he didn't have any choice. He had to. No, he didn't. And by legitimizing him, he's basically ruined the party, and it's become Trump's party because nobody could stand up to him. Nobody would stand up to him. And Paul Ryan is, it was funny, Donovan, one of my favorite conservative writers, pointed out that it's really funny because liberals have a special place of scorn for Paul Ryan and Marco Rubio that is simply not matched by anybody else. We were talking about this online. We hate Cruz because everybody hates Cruz.
Sure.
Right?
It's a popular
And we
thing.
look down on Trump because everybody looks down on Trump. But only Ryan and Rubio get the scorn of hypocrisy attached to them, way more than any of the others. It's true, and it's really interesting why that is. So I pose that question to you. Why are Paul Ryan, and just ask Armando about Marco Rubio, what he thinks about him, why are those two, looked at as such bald-faced hypocrites compared to the others? I mean, Ted Yoho means what he says. Louis Gohmert doesn't understand what he says. But Ryan and Rubio, Marco Rubio is the guy that says that people, under 21 shouldn't buy a gun in D.C., but I am opposed to that in Florida. It's just like total nonsensical. I'm going to say whatever I want to say and try to make it pretty, but it's not because total hypocrites.
Well, they were the guys who were, I guess, supposedly going to hold themselves out against the idiocy of Trump and who were supposed to have solid policy chops and were possible presidential contenders. At one point, Marco Rubio got, was it a Time magazine cover as the savior of the party or something? And they at first staked out positions, both of them briefly staked out positions of, I'm going to oppose Trump and I'm going to stand as the bulwark against him and everyone will rally to my side. And then when it didn't work for various reasons, they knuckled under in every possible way. So,
it's in a way, to me, it's just like how we look at, let's say, Steve Bannon versus John Kelly in the White House.
Okay.
Right? Bannon didn't have any pretense of being a grown-up and being a reasonable person that you could speak to. So whatever he does is neither a surprise nor a disappointment.
I guess that's true, yes.
Kelly comes in as the grown-up that's going to fix everything, get everything under control. That's how the press played him. Yeah. Turns out that he's just as much a white supremacist as Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon. And so the anger and loathing that goes with saying you were one thing but turning out to be something else is just an order of magnitude different.
Yeah. I guess that's certainly part of it. I was thinking, though, about Ryan in particular, just in terms of looking back and analyzing or thinking about that point at which he appeared poised to set himself up as a bulwark against Trump and then broke down. Right. I guess, as you were saying, well, he could have, or maybe he had, there was the writing that you were reading the article saying, he had no choice. Well, sure he did. He could have stood there and simply put his foot down. And I guess I got to thinking about this. When they said he had no choice, what they meant was he would be politically doomed if he did that. And maybe. So what maybe that was the worry for people who said that you shouldn't or that he had no choice. The implication being that had he done that and lost, he would have been ousted from Congress after one term of Trump in office. And then, of course, people who said, well, you better knuckle under in order to be able to do something. That we now find that the result of knuckling under and enabling Trump is also being out of office after one term of office, one term in Congress under Trump. So not much difference. But keep in mind, like everybody who touches Trump is diminished, whether it's John Kelly, whether it's Paul Ryan. You can't keep up this pretense.
It doesn't work. I don't know how long it takes for that to sink in so you understand it. We got that early.
Yes.
He
Nothing
never
works.
got it. So
No.
This is Matt Fuller. In so many ways, Ryan was supposed to be the anti-Trump. His squeaky clean looks and talking points temperament run completely counter to a man who seemingly says and does whatever he wants. Paul Ryan's real legacy will always be this: a feckless leader who oversaw Trump's takeover of the Republican Party and of Congress. Ryan toyed so many times with not backing Trump during the campaign. After denouncing Trump's proposed Muslim ban, after calling Trump's attacks on a judge of Mexican descent textbook racism, after saying he wouldn't campaign for a man so proud of his ability to grab them by the pussy. And I'm using that word because that's out there. Access Hollywood. Everybody in media uses it. And yet, by the very end of the campaign, Ryan found a way to support him. And once Trump was elected, Ryan found new ways to accept the president's abuses. He made excuses that Trump was new at this. He watched the House Intelligence Committee become a partisan circus. And let me just interrupt the article
Yes.
and interrupt myself in saying, Paul Ryan, and I hope you hear the anger in my voice, empowered Devin Nunes. That is yours, Paul Ryan. You are completely and totally 100% responsible for that. No BS. It's yours.
Yeah. Oh, he could have been removed entirely. And as soon as he found out that Nunes was a truly insane free agent, I mean, it was just bad news for the conference and the country that continued. And Paul Ryan was either at that point was like, I know I'm out of here soon anyway, so why have the confrontation? Or was saying, no, this is good. I actively want this.
Right. So Fuller says, and Matt Fuller is somebody who spends like 24 hours a day with Congress. Paul Ryan's name is now synonymous with the cowardice of the Republican Party. Even when Trump's policy directly contradicted the GOP like they have with free trade or government spending, Ryan found a way to fuse Trump's vision with one that might be palatable to Republicans. And that's been a price Ryan was willing to pay. So I step back and say, okay, that's your legacy. Everything that Trump touches dies, and you're part of it. You go out there broken.
Good. All right. Well, he didn't have much to run on anyway.
But you step back and put those two things together, the leadership fight and the practicalities of running Congress when you're a lame duck, and stepping back and looking at Paul Ryan's legacy and what people think of him now being a feckless leader. And how do you stay in power until November 2018?
That is a good question. And the answer is incompetent underlings.
Right. So let me just finish. That's when, like, the Bill Clinton applause comes. You know? Guy's been talking for like 3 days. And let me finish. Yay! So I just want to mention a couple of slides. Steve Kornacki was highlighting this on Morning Joe the other day. I sent them to you, and they're great. And the first one here is from Pew. These are all from Pew Research Center. Voters with college education in 1994, voters with college education were plus 15 for the Republicans, and now they're plus 15 for Democrats. That's Donald Trump. Thank you very much. You chased away all the educated people. Second, by generation, the silent generation is GOP plus 9. Boomers and Gen X are up for grabs. Boomers, Dem plus 2. Gen X, Dem plus 5. Millennials, Dem plus 27.
Oh.
Okay. And then the third one.
You can have any avocados you want.
Right. But of the Dems plus 27, a lot of those are millennial women because the men, millennials are the only age cohort where whites prefer Democrats.
Okay.
All the others, whites prefer Republicans, but when you take everybody together, it's either balanced or Democrats. But, Trump is losing a lot of his base. The farmers are still pretty upset about these tariffs, and the pork farmers and the soybean people are not happy about this. And as the tax bill turns out to be not a political winner for the Republicans, and they find they have very little else to run on, he's chasing folks away. So that's why, again, in background, Paul Ryan thinks, okay, well, I can't win, so I might as well leave now. So that's my segment and a half for today.
3 3/4, yeah.
But there was a lot going on. I had a lot to say.
And your last chance to do it for the week too. So I'm glad you took advantage of it.
Yeah, well, I'm
I should
done.
have slept
I'll talk to you
late.
on Monday.
Okay, very good. Nothing hopefully happens between then and now. Otherwise, we'll have a backlog when Monday comes around. But we're used to dealing with that.
Hey,
Thanks,
I did
Greg.
that right up to the break. That was pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I know. Well planned. Good job.
You got a half hour. What are you going to do? If you didn't have Pop Tarts by now, I don't know what you're going to do.
I will recap the first hour and a half of the program. I think in the last, there's plenty to do, of course. Thanks for carrying us so far through. Take care, and we'll see you on Monday. We'll be back in 2 minutes, and we'll talk about how we miss them already. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We might as well let the music play all the way out. We should have just played it for another half an hour and finished the show that way. How do we cap that? Well, there's an awful lot that we could turn to, and I guess the usual tension between, do we hit briefly a big bunch of stories that need to go on the record? Do we dive into something deeply? Perhaps we save that for Friday. And we round things up, and then we'll on Friday we'll do this whole exercise all over again and say I should have done the other thing. Let's see. Here I'll just note for the record that this thing exists. Lots of reporting this morning. CNN in particular leading the way on this one, saying it's an exclusive. Although I don't know how you define such things, and by now it doesn't even matter because everyone else is now reporting that they have an exclusive. There you are. They go over at CNN and look, but we have content about the fact that they have an exclusive. This time, the exclusive inside the GOP plan to discredit Comey, and I got to get back to my old habit of calling them the GOP. Inside the GOP plan to discredit Comey, and it's not much of a plan. From what I can see, it has been distilled down to starting a website referring to Comey as lion, apostrophe, like no G, Lion Comey, which, by the way, fantastic creativity. It was Lion Ted Cruz, there was Lions, there was Crooked Hillary, and then Lion this and Lion. It's about the worst, lamest thing you could possibly think of, and will convince no one. But essentially, they're going to crusade against Comey, I guess because he's got a book coming out, and they think that it will defuse some of that, and I don't really know what to tell you. I'll note for the record that it happened. It's a good thing that CNN has reported it, but I don't know what it changes, but thank you. I'm glad it's on the record. Let's see. Other things that deserve some attention. We addressed this a little bit yesterday. Joan McCarter made it clear for us, and now Politico catches up. Trump's push to redo the $1.3 trillion spending bill he signed sparks GOP revolt. In other words, what Greg mentioned earlier, the idea of a rescissions bill, pretty much dead in the water. For those of you who may have missed the explanation of it last couple times we touched on it, rescissions, it's a thing, it's a term of art. It's up there with reconciliation in terms of things that used to be, by the way, considerably less frequently used. It still hasn't been frequently used. It's not a new invention here, rescissions. There is a procedure by which it can work, but rescission itself is just sort of the term of art for it's the opposite of an appropriation. To the extent that you understand what an appropriation is, that is, it's not authorization. Authorization is its own term of art. It is the congressional okay, the legislative okay for the expenditure of funds from the Treasury. That is the physical part. No, it's not even physical, but it's closer to the physical part where they say, all right, now you can take money out of the Treasury and spend it for reason X. Reason X exists by virtue of the authorization, just to explain all those stupid moving parts of the budget process and the spending process in general. One, Congress creates a program. The authorizing committees, that is, say, if you were going to create a program for I don't know, the identification of dangerous chemicals that the EPA would clean up. Were the EPA still in that business? Let's say there's dangerous chemicals in the area. We're going to create Superfund, for instance. That would be perhaps the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate would be the authorizing committee. They would say, we want to authorize the creation of a new program that will clean up dangerous chemicals out in the environment. The Appropriations Committee, with jurisdiction over the EPA, and I don't even remember which one that is now, but whichever of the 13 subcommittees on the appropriations side has jurisdiction over the EPA, they would say, now that a program to remove dangerous chemicals from the environment has been authorized, and the authorization says you may use up to $50 million to do this job, the appropriators have the job of saying, will we fully fund it? And lowercase, I guess we could say, small a, authorize. Will we approve the withdrawal of up to $50 million from the United States Treasury to pay for the creation and execution of this authorized program? Authorized by those guys over there, and we will spend the money, and we don't have to spend all $50 million. We're just simply authorized to spend up to $50 million. We can choose to appropriate less, or technically it's against the rules for them to try to appropriate more, but you can bend every rule. But that's the way things work, and it separates the job of conceiving of a project and then deciding to spend the money on it, so that basically any program that gets implemented by the government has at least two governmental hurdles to clear, and it distributes the responsibility for spending more broadly, and presumably helps clean up the process, not leaving any one chairperson in sole control of things. And so, supposed to be an anti-corruption move as well. And it doesn't work all that well because there's still plenty of corruption. Now, rescissions enter into it. That's not a normal part of the procedure, but the rescissions would be, in other words, the opposite of an appropriation. And, there is an opposite of authorization. There's repeal or deauthorization. You can remove a program or remove the authority for a program and thereby technically kill or at least put in serious jeopardy the appropriation of funds for it, because congressional rules ordinarily forbid appropriating money for programs not authorized. So that would create a problem. But again, most problems can be waived. But a rescission is the opposite of an appropriation. In other words, the Congress decides we will spend $50 million to clean up those dangerous chemicals, changes its mind later for whatever reason, and says we will now rescind the funding. We will rescind $25 million of that $50 million, or all $50 million. That's, I guess, the closest match to the casual layperson's use of the term defunding. Very often, when they are talking about defunding something, they are in fact talking about removing its authorization so that it can't be appropriated for, or attacking its appropriation with the appropriate appropriations subcommittee. For instance, just because something has been authorized doesn't mean necessarily that the appropriations committee will agree to allow funding to be withdrawn for it, and you can sometimes prevent things that way. Once a committee has authorized a program, that doesn't mean that it's all done and paid for. You can attack it at the appropriations level. And it doesn't even mean it's over with now if the appropriators agree to put forward an appropriation and the Congress agrees to appropriate that money. You can always revisit it with a rescission. Get it? Reconciliation, something completely different. But we've done plenty of that. Anyway, it turns out Politico is reporting there's a lot of political discomfort with the idea of rescissions, even though there's lots of people who are out there saying, oh, the bill is going to raise the deficit by millions, billions, trillions, maybe even push the federal debt over $1 trillion again. Yes, that could be a problem. I'm worried about that. Let's have a rescissions bill. Okay. Lots of agreement maybe on that, although the people who actually do the work know what's coming next, and so they're saying no. But out in public, members of the public might be saying, yes, let's do that. We spent too much. Let's take some back. The legislators know what that means. Tough votes trying to decide what will be axed and trying to find a way to justify axing other people's stuff without getting your own stuff axed. It's terrible. It's uncomfortable. Deals that were made have to be undone. People stop trusting one another. That's the gist of the story and the reason why it would be incredibly difficult to bring a real rescissions bill forward. Trump may want it, but he doesn't write it, and so therefore he's going to have some difficulty. He has to persuade people to write the thing, and then you have to persuade people to go along with the thing that has been written. Long shot, no time for it, no skills with it. By the way, do take a look at Politico's piece, if only for the photo of Donald Trump in the Oval Office, smiling, walking around behind the Resolute desk. We learned about why that's called the Resolute desk. And putting, he can't remember to keep his hands out of photos. Putting his hand on the leather chair behind the desk, you can see in very stark relief against the dark leather how stubby his tiny little fingers are. It's very funny and well worth your time. Okay, moving on to things that should have been addressed earlier. I should have ended that segment about rescissions earlier, but I felt maybe that was a worthwhile segment, explaining that to people. A few other things here. Let's see. Oh, yes. Here's a good thought. Starting here with the tweet of Brendan Nyhan, which I don't usually start with, but very often Greg will, saying a very true thing about a tweet of someone else who also is saying something about someone else. So where do we start? Let's start all the way down the chain. Oh my God, he's also referring to somebody else, but I'm not sure which tweet in particular. So in order of the tweets, I guess, Paul Musgrave, I guess, would be first. Paul Musgrave, who tweets as Professor Musgrave, political science assistant professor at UMass Amherst. It's too long to put in your Twitter handle, Assistant Professor Musgrave. And also, I mean, who says that? And besides which, he'll eventually be promoted and then he'll have to start all over again. What does he have to say? He says, if the president's reckless Russia tweets were driven by Fox and Friends segments today, as Matt Gertz suggests, and Matt Gertz is always suggesting that because he's right and it's important, and you should therefore follow him. He's the guy who keeps track of when Fox and Friends says something and when Donald Trump repeats it on Twitter. So if the president's reckless Russia tweets were driven by Fox and Friends segments today, that would be yesterday, as Matt Gertz suggests, perhaps we should make the show's producer a Senate confirmable post. That is an interesting thought, isn't it? I mean, if somebody has that much control over what the president pronounces and considers to be public policy making, then, you know, can we let just anyone produce Fox and Friends segments? No, we can't. It ought to be a Senate confirmable post. Tongue in cheek, but gets to a very serious point. That is built on by Tom Wright, who tweets as Thomas Wright 08, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and he writes, there is a real question as to whether foreign intelligence agencies have tried to penetrate Fox News, especially Fox and Friends, and what safeguards Rupert Murdoch has put in place, if any. Think about that, right? What we're saying here is, again, Paul Musgrave has the very interesting thought, like, hey, you can't let just anybody produce Fox and Friends segments. It could be someone, an American, highly partisan and unqualified and driven by all sorts of prurient motivations, perhaps, in whatever sense you want to use that word. And so they should be subject to review, subject to Senate confirmation. Like I said, tongue-in-cheek, but only because that's never happened before. No president has ever been so driven by a single input before. And it's not normal. But Tom Wright having a slightly different concern here. What if it's not an American with, financial or otherwise prurient interests driving them, but someone from outside, the United States entirely, like a foreign intelligence agency? And that then commented on by Brendan Nyan, who says, I've conjectured this before. He wants everyone to know that. How could foreign intelligence not be interested in infiltrating Fox? It's a direct pathway into the president's brain. What more could you possibly want? If you were of the opinion that foreign intelligence agents were scrambling to come up with $200,000 cash, probably cash, to buy memberships at Mar-a-Lago so that they could sit out on the dining patio and overhear national security conversations, as was famously the case during one of the first North Korea missile crises of the Trump administration, then if that concerned you, then surely you would be concerned about this. Why couldn't you find your way into producing Fox News as a foreign intelligence agent? I mean, is it that far-fetched, for instance, to move on a career path from RT or Sputnik News segment producer to, say, a local Fox affiliate, to the national Fox level, to the Fox News channel, and forward from there? No, it's not. It's actually quite plausible. And, of course, Rupert Murdoch, his business empire spans, well, I don't know if we could really say it spans the globe, but it certainly spans the Atlantic Ocean. And he has significant holdings in the UK as well. And we did just hear the news the other day that the Murdoch properties in the UK were just raided by the European Commission, and we didn't know at the time exactly why that was happening. You'll recall that in wrapping up the show yesterday and telling you what was going to be on yesterday's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, just as Putnam had queued that one up for investigation, the Fox offices, in fact, not even what the Sky News, which is what he owns over there, but I guess he's got also the Fox offices in London. We'll have to get some follow-up on that one. Raided by the European Commission investigators. We weren't sure why that was happening, but remember, of course, all the parallels that we've been reading from Carol Cadwalader and others reporting over at The Guardian, the parallel investigations and worries that go along with them going on as between what happened in the United States with its election for president in 2016 and the UK and its votes that year for the Brexit question and the involvement of the same cast of lunatic characters in both. So could it be the case that foreign intelligence agents are in fact infiltrating the Fox infrastructure, whether as segment producers for the show here or in the offices over in the UK? I don't know. Ask the European Commission investigators, I guess. We'll see what we can find out about that one. We should probably dive into it. Let's see. But by way of continuing to round things up, also in the news, Steve Bannon trying to worm his way back into the good graces of the White House, apparently, with what the Washington Post reports is a plan to cripple the Mueller probe and protect Trump. That may or may not be in parallel or in sync or part and parcel of the plan to undermine James Comey with the Lion Comey website. But Bannon basically suggests doing the same thing directly against Mueller, and it included his plan, which is awfully stupid on its face. A basic, the usual sort of Steve Bannon style grandiose, I'm very smart and so therefore I can understand anything, including legal machinations and constitutional law. And so I'll offer you this Twitter JD look at what we should be doing with the cooperation that has taken place to date between the White House and the Mueller probe. It has revealed an awful lot, but not everything. But the less that gets revealed, the better for Trump, except the cat's already out of the bag with respect to the interviews that have already been conducted of White House personnel, campaign personnel, etc., by the Mueller team. But Bannon says he's got a way out of that. He says that they should have been asserting executive privilege all along. And he, of course, there's an awful lot that goes with that. And there's a lot of doctrine that goes with it. And just asserting it doesn't do the trick. You actually very often will find that the investigators will fight you on that and very often will win on that. And I guess he didn't really actually consider that that was a possibility. Maybe, again, he's thinking in raw terms of, do we have 5 votes on the Supreme Court or can we get them in order to win or to change the doctrine, which would go hand in hand. You could obviously, you could win by changing doctrine if you had 5 votes under your control. But also he says all of the interviews that have previously been given could, as he put it, be rendered null and void by saying, well, we're retroactively claiming executive privilege. And so therefore, all the people you interviewed already, you can't use any of the evidence developed from those. And that's just plain not the way it works so far. Anyway, I mean, I guess, again, if you find yourself with controlling 5 votes on the Supreme Court, you can change the way it works. That would be the dark, evil, oh my God, overarching plan, if it exists in his mind. But I don't know whether it really goes any further than, yeah, I think that it could happen that way, and so therefore I will just publish that as a plan, and everyone will say, he used big words saying it, and so therefore it must be true. Well, it's not, at least not to date. Anyway, let's see. Other bits and pieces that deserve discussion. Mike Pompeo, now up for confirmation as nominee for Secretary of State, replacing Rex Tillerson, moving over from CIA. Terrible idea, generally speaking. Terrible idea also because Mike Pompeo doesn't really belong on the job. But bits and pieces that you need to know before the weekend, and we still do have a day. One on the practical side, one on the philosophical side. On the philosophical side, I'll at least mention this, a good piece that we should review over in the Huffington Post. Congress should ask Mike Pompeo about torture in Yemen. You should ask him about torture anywhere, but in particular, torture in Yemen, which is intriguing on several fronts. And yes, that ought to be a part of the discussion, but I don't know if I really trust Congress to reach the right conclusion about torture on anything or anywhere. On the other hand, one thing that they might have less discomfort in dealing with, believe it or not, Mike Pompeo, part of the most, what we'll call, there's the greatest generation, then the silent generation, then the forgetful generation, I guess. This is just the most forgetful administration ever. I don't know what's happening here. Mike Pompeo, it says here, according to McClatchy's reporting, failed to disclose, you get that? Is that familiar? Failed to disclose Chinese business connection. Golly, that's unusual that somebody would have direct business with a Chinese state-owned firm and fail to disclose it and get confirmed as CIA director and still failing to disclose it to be up for Secretary of State. I don't know. Maybe it's harmless. It really could be. There are such things. But boy, howdy, these guys forget to disclose a lot of things. Anita Kumar and Leslie Clark report this one. Here's the deal. CIA Director Mike Pompeo failed to disclose last year that he owned a Kansas business, Like, why fail to disclose that? That imported oil field equipment from a company owned by the Chinese government. Again, it may be totally benign. It's equipment. It gets used. We bought it. The people that sell it happen to be Chinese. That's all there is to it. But of course, there is the fact that the Chinese government, well, they own a lot of the companies that do business in China, and that's a reality of dealing with them. And to the extent that you have large business interests that are dependent on the whims of the Chinese government, who may at some point simply say, yeah, don't sell those machines because the guy who's buying them is the CIA director of the United States, and we would like to put a dent in his pocketbook. You know, it could happen, and that's something we should be aware of so that we can monitor what he's up to when he's, dealing with his business, or I'm sure some blind trust somewhere is administering it. Anyway, the issue with the Chinese company, which was confirmed in a series of documents obtained by McClatchy this week, never came up during his confirmation hearings last year. Many senators contacted Wednesday were reluctant to comment until they had more information. Ben Cardin of Maryland said he was unfamiliar with the discrepancy, but said it was troubling. It is. If there's an inconsistency in his questionnaire, that would be a matter of major interest, Cardin said, because, you're supposed to be pretty squeaky clean about your disclosures when you're confirmed to high-ranking government office, and in particular to be CIA director and then Secretary of State. They're kind of high-ranking things, and we really should know about that. All right. So the story is on the record. We can dive a little more deeply into it tomorrow, perhaps. Another minor story, I guess, that we'll throw out there for your consideration. Scott Pruitt is disgusting. There you have it. This guy, I mean, we've been through all the corruption stories. I think we missed one or two along the way. Did you know this? He too is in on the craze for challenge coins. And I guess he's not the first one, even at the EPA, to do it. But we need to end this practice. By the way, there should be no challenge coins for civilian personnel, with the possible exception of the president, maybe the vice president, Secretary of Defense. I don't know, maybe the Secretary of State to give out while he's visiting diplomats abroad, but there's no reason for the EPA administrator to have a challenge coin. These are pogs for adults, and we should get rid of it and don't spend any money on it. The previous administrator apparently did have one. What makes the Scott Pruitt idea dumber than anyone ever before is the venality with which he approaches the thing. Lisa Friedman, Ken Vogel put this one together for the New York Times. Scott Pruitt's idea to update an EPA keepsake. The idea, less EPA, more Pruitt. When Scott Pruitt wanted to refashion the EPA's challenge coin, forget the dumbness of the whole thing. Here's his idea. He proposed an unusual design. Make it bigger and delete the EPA logo. What? Pruitt instead wanted the coin to feature some combination of symbols more reflective of himself and the Trump administration. Why? Because me. I love me. Among the possibilities, a buffalo to evoke Mr. Pruitt's native Oklahoma, like who cares, and a Bible verse to reflect his faith, because that would totally be ridiculous and separation church, state, you could probably sneak that one by, but who cares what your favorite Bible verse is? That doesn't belong on a challenge coin at all, ever. And you don't even really, not supposed to have a challenge coin, period. He also, by the way, apparently wanted to eliminate the EPA's logo entirely because and this is the dumb part, he thought it looked like a marijuana leaf, which it does not. It is sort of loosely based on the design of a plant. It has leaves, as marijuana does. And then in the center there, instead of one long spiky leaf in the middle, it has a stem. And instead of a flower, it has a round sort of field with, some sort of like healthy earth evoking picture with some water and some land and some sun and sky. And that's supposed to mean, clean air, clean land, clean water. Doesn't look anything like a marijuana leaf. If anything, it looks like some sort of whacked out daisy or chrysanthemum, perhaps. I don't know. Has nothing to do with anything. But just basically all you need to know is he wanted to make it bigger than any other person's challenge coin and he wanted it to be about Scott Pruitt and don't say anything about the EPA. The whole point of being able to give these things out would be that you've done something that merits notice by the EPA. Anyway, it's just a dumb story, but he's a dumb guy. It's enough with this thieving bastard. By the way, somebody else found somewhere some video of when he, back in Oklahoma days, was part owner of a local minor league baseball franchise. Apparently he put himself in the commercial for the baseball because everybody needs more Scott Pruitt in their lives. He's an egomaniac, and what was he doing owning a baseball team anyway? He wasn't earning enough money. Just another one of the weird grifts that he had going for him because he was friends with people who were bankers who eventually got banned for life from banking because they're corrupt. This guy has to go. And, well, hopefully it all works out in the end. But I guess in some sense he's the least of our problems. That's all I can fit in there today. However, Justice Putnam comes next, and we can get you a sneak preview of what he's got on tap. Let's see what we can cram in here. The Department of Justice, not his house, but the actual Department of Justice, sent the U.S. Attorney to Fox and Friends to complain to Trump through the TV machine how they review and redact documents when Congress requests them. Trying to get that whole thing set up. There's more. I'll squeeze in after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about this? A second Republican quit Congress yesterday. Also, neighbors of a Trump-loving Sinclair boss, David D. Smith, say he's breaking restraining orders and making life miserable for everybody. And the Department of Justice suddenly halts legal aid for detained immigrants facing deportation. I know he's also got that challenge coin store, plus much more after this.